Welcome to the Broken Graciously podcast, where we challenge the culture of brokenness by exchanging beauty for ashes holistically, with candid conversations, transparency, and practical tips. I'm your host, Tanisha B. Lester, lovingly known as Coach T. I'm a Master Certified Life and Business Coach, Certified Christian Coach, Certified Pastoral Counselor, and published author. I look forward to engaging with you in the comments as well as on IG. Follow me on IG at Tanisha B. Lester with the number 1. Please like and subscribe to this podcast. Welcome to another episode of Broken Graciously, where we challenge the culture of brokenness holistically with candid conversations, transparency, and practical tips. This is Coach T. So welcome to episode 5. Last week we talked about arrested development, and we got into the definition of it, what it means, what the implications of it are, and all of those sort of things. So this week, let's talk about lost time. Let's talk about timelines. So have you ever, and you can ask yourself this question, have you ever sat in a place where you felt like, man, I've lost so much time, or I've wasted so much time, or, if I could just go back in time and do some things over. If you've ever been in that place, I understand. I totally get you. When I began to go on a path of healing and finding myself and discovering who I am and what I'm supposed to do and what I'm supposed to be, like that was the first thing that came to my mind. Like, man, if I had only been able to get this time back, or like I've wasted so much time going around in circles and not knowing who I was or what I was supposed to do. And it felt like hopeless. And if you've ever felt that way, let me tell you, it's not hopeless. Number one, last week we talked about, and I know I've said this before, if not last week, but definitely on another episode, that God already knew us, right? God had already set up a plan. He knew all the things we were going to do, all the things we weren't going to do, all the things we would achieve, at what time we would achieve it. Like he knew all of those things. But we don't look at it from that standpoint. We just look at it from where we are. So having said that, I want to encourage you and just give you the thought that by saying he knew all of that, understand that he knew all the pit stops we would make, all the roadblocks, all the rest stops. Like he knew all of that. And it was already built into his plan for us. So it's not that we've necessarily lost time. We feel as though we've lost time, but it's not that we've necessarily lost time. It's just merely we're catching up to time. We're catching up to what God has already said about us. We're catching up to who he has already called us to be. And it's those moments that give you hope, because what happens is he redeems the time. Now, I've been in Georgia for 7 years. As of January this year, it's 7 years. Can I just tell you, from 2019 until now, things have moved so fast in my life. Like when I talk to friends from back home, or even when I just talked to my baby brother, and he's like, yeah, man, things like really move fast for you. Like so many things have changed. Like you're not even the same person. And that gives me comfort because, I felt like I lost time. I felt like I wasted 40 plus years of my life just going around in circles and cycles of being paralyzed and being stuck and not understanding who I was, and like all of those things. But it's not even that. Like he literally redeems the time. Like I said, so many things have moved quickly. I never thought that I needed to leave a state for something to happen for me. Like that just never even occurred to me. So here's what I'll say. Number one, here's tip number one. If by chance you have felt like you need to move, you felt like you need to change your circle, you felt like something needed to change, go with it. Like whatever that little thing is, that's God speaking to you. Go with it. Now, is it going to be scary? It's going to be terrifying. You're not necessarily going to know all the moves to make. It's going to be all of that. But I encourage you to go with it. Now, I will say, I didn't know I was supposed to move. I was put in a situation where I had to move. That's tip number two. If by chance God has already told you to do a thing and you've not done that thing, He will put you in a position where you have no choice. That's where I was. I was put in a position where I had no choice but to move, to go. Now, I knew eventually that I would have to move to Georgia because my mother had health issues that would probably put me in a position where I would need to move in order to take care of her. I'm an only child, so I can't pass the buck off to another sibling or anything like that. Now, you just heard me say I have brothers, but we don't have the same mother. We have the same father. So I'm still in that same position of being an only child. Like I was raised an only child. So yeah, like I knew I would have to come, but I didn't expect it so early. So in that instance, you could be put in a situation where you don't have a choice. But you'll notice things start to change, things start to shift if you just go with it, if you don't buck against it. So that's tip number two. Also, just in saying that, like I had to reconcile, I'll put it that way. I had to reconcile within myself that like my timeline obviously wasn't working. So at this stage, I'm 50 going on 51 today. Like in my mind, it was okay. By the time I would hit this age, I thought I would be married. I thought maybe I would have had another child because I wasn't going to have another child outside of wedlock. I promised myself that I wouldn't have another child unless I were married. I thought I would have had a college degree by now. I thought, I would be traveling, like doing all kinds of things, right? The things that we think are going to happen in our lives that we kind of plot and plan our lives out to be. But none of those things had happened. So in coming here, like that was another point of reconciliation for me of just not knowing like what is life going to look like. And there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with not necessarily knowing what life is going to look like. There's nothing wrong with the things that you thought would happen, recognizing and realizing that that's not going to happen right now. It's not to say that it's not going to happen at all. It just might be not for right now. So I had to sit with myself and be okay with that. I had to relinquish my timeline. Now that's a hard pill to swallow when you sit back and look at your life and you think, okay, these things aren't accomplished. You kind of sort of start to feel like maybe you failed somewhere. And I did feel that way a little bit, and maybe you felt that way. And it's not to say that we failed at life, or you're a failure, period. It's not to say any of that. It's just simply to say, it's just not for right now. And that's okay. It's okay to not be moving into things that you thought you would be moving in, because obviously that's your timeline, but that's not God's timeline. That's not the timeline that He's already set up, that He already pre-established. That's not what this is. So when you begin to come out of agreement with what your timeline is, but come into alignment and agreement with God's timeline, baby, that's a whole nother situation right there. That's a whole different ball game. It's a whole different show. And it's so much easier and more palatable when you agree with what He's already said about you. So that was a hard thing of, not feeling like I was where I was. So that's tip number 3. Relinquish your timeline. And it's okay. It really is okay, because then when you do that, that redeeming the time, it's a real thing. Again, I've done more things in the last 3-4 years than I ever thought possible in my life. Like warp speed, kind of, sort of. I would probably agree with warp speed. And yeah, it's been really cool. It's been difficult, because I've been stretched. I've had to do things outside of my comfort zone. And that's what that giving up your timeline and, feeling like you're out of time is all about. Like coming out of your comfort zone. And don't let, like society would say, they would probably call me an old maid or a spinster. That back in early in my time, that's what they would call us, especially women who are reached a certain age and haven't gotten married. But I'll say, in that arena, I don't get a whole lot of pressure like some people do. Like, when you gonna get married? Da, 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 da. Like, a couple people ask me that, but I don't know if it's because they just threw up their hands and like, oh well, that ain't gonna never happen for her at this point. I don't know, and I don't necessarily care. It just bothers probably me more than it bothers other people, and that's not even a thing, because even in that timeline of thinking I would be at a particular marital status by now, I've given up that timeline also, because here's what I know for sure. I know without a shadow of a doubt that there is no way on God's green earth that any of the people that I was in relationships with, they would have lasted. I probably would have been divorced about 3 times by now. So in that instance, it was better for me to not have married them at all. That's number 1. Number 2, I don't think that their egos would have handled the things that I do now. Because my relationships were more about them than anything. So it wouldn't have these things would have been a source of contention. Absolutely would have been. And that's fine. They are who they are. And I'm not saying they're bad people. They just weren't the people for me. They just weren't the men that would be able to handle the things that I'm doing now and the things that are to come. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. I knew they weren't for me. Now, did I always know at the time? Maybe not. I guess that's twofold. So, you ever have this little niggling that, probably shouldn't be in this, but out of desperation? Yeah, a lot of my relationships were out of desperation because I didn't want to be alone. But that's something else that I had to relinquish. The fear of being alone, the fear of, if I don't just go ahead and deal with this person because this person say they like me or this person is interested in me, like I wouldn't have to deal with any of that. So it's fine. It's absolutely fine to know that you don't need to be in some of those situations. It's fine to know that, certain relationships just aren't for you. And if by chance you feel that way, I would encourage you to get out quicker, sooner than later. Because you don't know what is in store for you that you're holding up because you're in a relationship that you don't need to be in. And you know without a shadow of a doubt that you don't need to be in it. That was probably one of my bigger revelations of, you know what, God? I thank you for protecting me and protecting my heart from not continuing in relationships that I didn't need to be in. Because there's something bigger for me that they weren't supposed to be attached to. And that's fine. Because here's what I do know. The person that is for me will align with everything that I'm doing. He will be fine with everything that I'm doing. And not only that, he will complement everything that I'm doing. and I'll complement everything that he's doing, and we'll be purpose partners. It won't be, someone that doesn't understand or doesn't get it, right? Being an entrepreneur is a whole different space. And without someone understanding that, it can get complicated. Um, that whole unequally yoked thing is real. And I'm glad I'm not in that space. I'm very grateful for that. So those are my tips about, not worrying about where you are, not worrying about the time you feel like you've lost. Move. If God tells you to move, don't let him put you in a position where you have to be moved or that you have no choice, because it'll happen. My third tip is to relinquish your timeline of where you think you should be. Just let it, just chill, just relax, just go with the flow, just let it flow. Let God move you. I'm not saying don't move. Understand me clearly. I'm not saying don't move. Don't sit back and wait for him to make things happen for you. If you know the steps, follow the steps. As long as you're following the steps, everything else will follow suit. But absolutely, when you relinquish your timeline, God will redeem the time for you. So, just relinquish, give it up, think about it, all of that good stuff, and watch God redeem the time for you. So, thank you again for tuning in to another episode. Come back next week where we'll tap into something else. Hey, have you liked and started to follow this podcast yet? If not, what are you waiting for, sugar? Like and follow, please. All right. I will get with you next week. Have a blessed week.